Once you're on that project, you and the owner own that material. You're responsible for it. It should not go to landfill. Some of it does, but there's some that can be reused, repurposed. Maybe it's also just getting it into doing deconstruction instead of demolition, getting it to a reuse reseller. There's a lot of opportunity there. As a designer, it's your job to be creative and be inspired by the materials at hand.
It's estimated that more than 12 million tons of wood is landfilled every year in the U.S., and this figure doesn't even take into account the 46 million metric tons of urban lumber that is either landfilled, chipped, or burned. In both scenarios, this is wood that still has tremendous economic and environmental value, and often it's wood that is rich with history and story. Luckily, there are some intrepid entrepreneurs working to extend the life of this valuable wood by rescuing and processing it and getting it into the hands of the design-build community. One such entrepreneur is Robin Janson, co-founder of Urban Evolutions, a Wisconsin-based supplier of reclaimed and salvaged wood materials. At this year's Living Future conference, Robin made the case for deconstruction over demolition, how designers can unlock the richness and story that's often embedded in salvaged wood, and what they're now doing with felled urban trees. She also shared the startup story of Urban Evolutions, which developed organically out of a personal need.
We actually had a house fire. We had a very old farmhouse from the 1870s, and this was back in the 90s, and we wanted to restore it back to what it was, and there was no materials that we could find to restore an old house. There wasn't old flooring, there wasn't old doors, and we wanted it to have baseboards that were 10 inches high, and so we started salvaging, and then other people started wanting what we did, and we just sort of fell into it, and it's been like really looking at things that are left behind on a salvage site, or if someone's remodeling, and we just found the stuff that was left behind still had life.
Since those early days, Urban Evolutions has narrowed the focus to primarily wood products, but they've been able to expand their capabilities in that domain in more recent years.
Most of our focus is on wood, flooring, really every application you can think of wood inside a building. We actually productize it out of reclaimed material. We do some new wood, but most of it, our mission is really reclaimed. It's wood that is, again, still those leave-behinds, right? Like 2x4s and 2x6s from new construction waste, buildings that are not necessarily vintage. We realize there's a lot of that. So what can we do? How do we get that feedstock into the market? Also urban trees. We work with cities to repurpose the trees that are felled because of disease and storm and development, and how do we get those trees? They're perfectly capable of becoming lumber. So how do we keep them out of the landfill? As well as vintage lumber, all that beautiful barn and factory wood, we still do that.
Though they've been working at this for nearly 3 decades and have successfully reclaimed hundreds of thousands of square feet of wood, intercepting that wood before it gets to the landfill is not without its challenges.
Each type of source I talked about has its own set of challenges. I think it's people not knowing how to connect with a resource or a reclaim provider, like product manufacturer like us. There's something about reuse that's very decentralized, right? It's like even in nature, like reuse happens like on the forest floor, like a million different organisms. Well, it feels like that in the US or in the world too. Reuse is a very decentralized type of practice. So who do you call when a tree is coming down in your yard, or who do you call when that barn just fell and you want it taken apart and reused? So we just get those calls. We try to aggregate that material and get it. We try to find partners who are aggregators of that material, and we try to work with those. So we try to get a truckload of something. So that's an easier way for us to form a business as opposed to a one-off tree or a barn maybe, but we like to get a lot of something, because then we can turn it into a product that's predictable and can be used in a predictable long-term way.
The other challenge companies like Urban Evolutions are often up against is our society's deeply ingrained culture of new. We prize the shiny and the new and tend to discard the used, even if there's still potential in them.
I think Simona from MSR put it well when she said we are sort of trained to want new things. Like everything in the world in our jobs, if you're a designer, is like buy new, this new. So I think it's just how our consumptive society is wired. We're now wired for that, and I think so. There's some rewiring that has to happen, and we made a joke about you're in a professional office space, but you show up and you're like a crowbar, like a like a throwback to, hey, why can't we just reuse these office chairs that no one really sat in? Why do we have to get rid of these? Maybe the client will like them. Or how about we look at reclaimed wood as an option as opposed to a laminate. Actually, wood flooring not only can last 100 years or 50 years, can be refinished, and then you can pull it up, and guess what? You can reuse it again. Like we built a whole business on old wood that was in buildings for a very long time, and so people are like, oh, there's a risk about wood. Well, there's actually very little risk about wood. It has quite a durable life in a commercial space as well as a residential space if it's well installed and well cared for and well finished. Nature's got great solutions for us.
And some of those solutions are actually right at our fingertips in our surrounding urban environments. And part of what Robin and others in urban forestry are trying to do is educate designers and specifiers about what you can create with this lumber. It's not just your typical rustic barnwood siding that we associate with feature walls behind a reception desk.
Certainly when you hear reclaimed wood, you think, barnwood, rustic, nail holes. And what we've been excited about is working with urban wood. So those city trees is a much more, the product looks a lot like new wood. It's more of a reference for a modern commercial space. It's not, there's not nail holes, and it's a very sort of fun, beautiful, just looks a lot like virgin wood. So it's given us an opportunity for designers to go, oh, that looks great. It doesn't look rustic. It can look very modern. So that has been a helpful way for us to penetrate the commercial world, keeping a look that's kind of fresh and contemporary and helping them understand it's out there for them.
Beyond wood, Robin recommends designers become urban miners of sorts and then get creative about what they can do with existing materials at hand. And it can often start on the project site.
I think they should first start mining the materials they have access to. So if they're on a project and they know they're working on a floor of a big office building and they know that the materials are going to be stripped, they should first assess and do an inventory of those materials. So it's the materials at hand, right? Don't try to make it more complicated. What can we reuse in the project we're working on right now? How do we build time in for evaluation of that and for taking an inventory of that? How do we get the GC involved? And we just spend a little time having a meeting about that and looking for opportunities. So we're almost like modern day miners or excavators. Instead of extracting from the land some virgin resource, we're going to excavate and mine our own, what we have access to right on our own project. It could be an entire building that's being taken down. Once you're on that project, you and the owner own that material. You're responsible for it. It should not go to landfill. Some of it does, but there's some that can be reused, repurposed. Maybe it's also just getting it into doing deconstruction instead of demolition, getting it to a reseller, reuse reseller. Doesn't mean that everything has to be reused on that next project, but there's a lot of opportunity there. It's as a designer, it's your job to be creative and be inspired by the materials at hand.
Despite the potential material abundance that may already exist on the project site, Robin said these opportunities are often overlooked because the typical design process is not really modeled for reuse and circularity.
Even the best of intentioned projects where there's deconstruction in mind and all these things, for some reason, we design the new building before we've done those steps. And I don't know if it's the first thing that the architect and the owner want to engage on is what's the thing we're doing. It's fun. People can just sort of sit at their desk and design the building conceptually, put a beautiful rendering out. Maybe that's how you get financing. But the problem is if you do that before you've assessed what's existing on the land or on the floor or in that space, you actually are building something that's very disconnected from the materials that would be a potential resource. So it's this like loophole in the process that people don't realize. So don't design until you've done your walkthrough, you've assessed available materials, you've done that mining activity. There's those lost opportunities if you design as if materials are unlimited, which is what we do. We design as if they're just going to come to us. Materials are limited. The earth knows that.
And taking the time to mine for that opportunity often yields materials and ultimately a design that is rich with history, story, and character.
My husband took apart a heart pine. Heart pine is this beautiful wood. They call it southern steel. And there was a factory, an old tractor factory, JIK's tractor factory in Wisconsin, and he spent a little over a year dismantling. He had a big crew, 25. It was a couple million board feet of this material. And when we bought the rights to the building, he wasn't sure if it was all heart pine, and the financing really, it made sense if it was all heart pine. And we just sort of on a gamble, we're like, we think it's all heart pine. Well, it was. It was all the highest grade, beautiful lumber. I mean, these are 400- or 500-year-old trees that then held up a building for 100 years, or a factory, and it's 2 million board feet, and he's sold every stick, and it's been in 5 or 7 different major commercial projects we've been in. So this wood has had such a long life. And so, it was a good gamble. He's a risk taker. He personally oversaw and numbered those timbers, and it was giving a lot of value to that material and time and energy, and it worked. It was a lot of work, but it worked. A couple million board feet was saved, and it's going to live on. I mean, 400-year-old trees, 100 years, and then that wood will be recycled again. That people know the value in that lumber, so it just feels like a great longevity story.
There's also a great longevity story baked into Urban Evolution's philosophy, and that is, if we solve problems for people and planet, the revenue will come.
I think our business ethos is taken actually from Muhammad Yunus, who started microfinance. He, as a business person, he taught me a different way to think about business just in reading his book, which is if you solve a problem, businesses can be about solving problems, and if you solve a problem, someone will pay you for it. So as opposed to creating a need or a want or just chasing profit. The way if you can chase revenue for your business is to just solve problems for people. So we really try to align ourselves with there's problems for the planet, and our market is what are people aware of. We don't want to get too far ahead because they'll think that's a cool idea, but if I got to solve problems for them. So I have to align with what can I do and what are people looking for and how do I get that sweet spot. That's the challenge of business, and I love finding that you can innovate and get really ahead of the market and do the super green thing, but if people aren't ready for it, there will be no demand.